Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. My dear students, I welcome you again in another very important topic in the course of English language teaching and TESOL, which is the teaching of English language to the speakers of other languages. Today's session is about teaching of listening skills, which is a very important stage in the development of English language for any new learner. Before this, we talked about the teaching of English in Pakistan, and we talked about the approaches and methods in English language teaching. While we were going through all these theories, language learning theories, methods, and approaches, you may have realized or you may not have realized, or from your own personal language learning experience, you would have felt one thing very common, that uh, teaching of listening skills does not find good place in the curriculum of English language teaching in this country. I mean, you take classes, class 1, class 6, class 10, or you go up to the college level, and even you go to a university's program. There are few only chapters or sessions in the higher education curriculum. Otherwise, in the schools, in the colleges, you do not have any, as far as I remember, the government run schools, there is no place for teaching of listening or the development of listening skills. And this, I consider, one of the fundamental issues that has not only impeded the very growth of English language, but has also been the reason that many of our students, when they are put in everyday life communication, when they are put in everyday life situation, or even in their interviews, they are not able to perform simply because they are not very good at listening skills. So we have got issues in reading, we've got issues in writing, we have got issues, of course, in speaking. But I consider the most important of all is that all these issues basically spring from very weak listening skills. And this is very sad that our policy and planning part of our English education does not have that due consideration for listening skills as should have been given. Otherwise, if you take any international English language program for academic purposes, you would always find something on listening. But you would agree that this is the first time in your last 10 years or 16 years that you are taking a talk on the importance or the practicality of and the need for listening skills. And this is first time that we are going to discuss it in a formal setting. So my dear students, teaching of listening is very critical in the development of English language skills, all English language skills. I'm saying this simply because of various factors in it. Now, I would just ask you to recall that how did you learn language, your first language? Definitely the first words that you started speaking out was while you were a baby for about 8-10 months old at home. So you would listen to the sounds that take place around you, and then you begin to sort of replicate those sounds, copy those sounds, mimicry those sounds. So once you do that, you listen and then you speak. So listen, you receive something and then you produce something. You listen something and you receive something and then you produce something. So the sounds begin to form pictures in our minds, and they all come through ears, and then we produce them through our tongue and through our speech skills. So the importance of listening skills is very paramount if considered considered in the very acquisition of language or the learning of language, whatever you consider. We've got two main paradigms in the teaching of English. So we'll today, in this today's session, we'll discuss the first the theoretical side of it, and then we'll move on into the practical side of it. But I would like you to realize this, that your good speaking skills can never come if you're not spending good time in listening to English, listening to a range of English, listening to all varieties of English. I mean, uh, we had a survey last year conducted by the students of final year, and that survey was that how many students, uh, how much time every student spent in listening to English. The results of that survey were very, very disappointing, in fact, that the students could hardly listen even 1 hour every day, and that they could continue for several years. You see, if our students are not good listeners, do not listen and recognize and make meaning of the text or the discourse that they listen, how are they going to develop their speaking skills? And then how are they going to make the difference and between different words when they are used in phrases and chunks, and how the words fit together and make meanings when they are spoken out in different contexts. So it was very critical for, it is very critical for all the learners of English not to neglect the listening skills. It is a very important skill. If you really want to grow, the first thing I would say, you all would have learned a very common saying that practice makes man perfect. Practice is something that is at the heart of English language learning also. But then practice of what? Practice of how much? Practice of uh, uh, um, how to do it every day. I mean, and if not doing practice of listening, what does it mean? It simply means that we are not interested and serious about listening. We are not serious about speaking. We are not serious about our growth in English language. And that is the reason, when you talked about a acculturation model, and one of the basic premise in that model was that it talked about a person going as a migrant to a foreign country, become part of that community, and just was listening to a range of phonological structures, lexical structures, and phrases in that particular language, and acquiring it very quickly. So we got several models to guide us, to inform us, how can we be good listeners, speakers, and readers and writers of English. We'll discuss all these skills like speaking, reading, and writing as we move on into this program. But today our topic will be the first, which is the first part of teaching listening, which is partly general and theoretical also. So we'll discuss the general issues that come in terms of teaching listening. So here is the outline line of my session today. Can you see this?
Yes, sir.
Now, this is a very common question. Now, today's session basically will be about these uh, 5 elements, 5 questions, should I say. Well, still people will continue to come, so I'm just getting a bit of a distraction here. So I really appreciate that people are coming, and that's very good. They can join us anytime during this talk, but I would really appreciate if they could join us before the scheduled time, so that we do not have these interruptions in the middle. All right. So the first thing, what is listening? We'll discuss today what is listening, why to teach listening, what are the kinds of listening, and what is something amazing and special about listening. What is special about, hello? Are you listening to me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Are you listening to me?
Yes.
All right. So,
Yes,
and
sir.
then we'll discuss about the principles of listening. Now, these are a few things that every good teacher of English, as I assume all of you are good teachers of English, going to be teachers of English, and good students at the same time, need to understand these 4 or 5 things before we move into our practical and professional phase of our life. So we'll be focusing our discussion today on these 5 uh, uh, topics. The first thing is, what is listening? So, well, as I always say, when we define reading, when we define what is writing and speaking, so is the question of what is listening. Basically, you can just give it a very general meaning that listening is the ability to identify and understand what others are saying. So it is basically a kind of an ability. But I take a step further and I say that it is a process. Now I'll just hold you for a minute. Uh, I call reading also a process. I call writing also a process. I call uh, uh, speaking also a process. Well, I'm just having some problems here. Anyway, uh, okay. So I say I consider all of them as a process. Do you understand the term here, the word process? When I'm saying it is a process, listening is a process, speaking is a process, reading is a process. All these 4 skills, they uh, are basically a process of communication. And they have very powerful roles in this process. All right. So we'll discuss how it is. For example, reading is a process in which we have got some kind of communication taking place between the text, the reader who deals with these words and trying to decode them and their meaning. And also writing is a process where a writer has in front of him to put some graphical words which are basically very graphical, and then conveys his meaning through those graphical signs. So a writer, uh, begins to draw some sketches on the page, then developing them into a kind of an outline or a sketch or a rough draft, editing them, making them final draft. So I mean, I see all these different dimensions of all these skills as a kind of processes. So I consider reading also, listening also a process. Now, apparently, it is a process which is between 2 people. The one is the speaker, the other one is the listener. But as on the listening side of it, if we consider, it is something which involves a kind of a process which uh, which depends largely on 3 sources of information that every speaker must have. 3 sources of information, and that we all use also. Now, what are these sources of information? These sources of information basically are our 3 levels of knowledge. And if we are not having these 3 sources of information or 3 sources or awareness about these 3, we will always have problems in that. First of all is schemata. Schemata is important in learning every skill, and that is simply the kind of knowledge you have about the topic, or kind of a expectation about the topic or the content that's going to be taught and what's going to be taught. For example, today your schemata was that the teacher will be coming to teach you listening. So you would be expecting some talk on listening. And what already you have, that you are used to my accent, my style expression, my talking, my ability to demonstrate, use figures and different kind of language choices and options. So I mean, you had some kind of knowledge in your mind. So schemata is basically your existing and your pre-knowledge of the topic that you are going to learn or we are going to learn. And that is also important in all other skills, including listening. And then the second important source of information for all of us is the context. As a good listener of English, we need to recognize that listening always takes place in the context. And so we need to draw contextual information, which involves the situations in which who is talking to whom, where and when, and all that physical context is understood when somebody is going to listen to a particular talk. Then the third level of knowledge for listeners is their skills in language. I mean, uh, these skills we can say are about our knowledge about language grammar, our knowledge about language vocabulary, our knowledge about the pronunciation of that language. I mean, if we have some kind of, rather I should say, very good knowledge about the words, about the grammatical structures, about the pronunciations, we can face very easily any text that comes before us for listening. But in these three important phases of knowledge, in my opinion, language is the most critical one, the most important one for all of us. Because this is where Pakistani learners of English, or I should say international learners of English who take English as a second language or a foreign language, the first challenge that they encounter is their their language knowledge. When they are listening to a text, the pronunciation of native speakers is very challenging. The long grammatical structures are very challenging. Vocabulary at times is very challenging. So I mean, these are the three important dimensions of the process of listening that we need to understand fully before we begin to listen and before we begin to learn about listening. It's very, very important for us. So it is the schemata, it is the context, it is the level of language that you have. If your language level, which means is not very good, definitely you are going to suffer and be, disappointed and be not able to catch the information that comes through lectures or whatever the talk is. So that is how we can explain the answer to the question, what is listening? And there are quite other things as well, but very briefly, I just put it like that. The next uh, question is why to teach listening? Now, as I said in the beginning, uh, we teach listening. We should teach listening. I don't know why there is no place for teaching of listening in Pakistani syllabus. And I remember if we talk about in one of the meetings at policy planning level, I had raised this question. But then there were some other policymakers who decided that if we put listening into the teaching programs, how would we be testing it? So then this is very technological and this is very challenging for teachers then at the schools, colleges, how to test listening. For them, they need machines, they need equipment that is could be tape recorders, cassettes, recording machines, and many other things, which of course are not widely available. So I mean, this is the new challenge. This is a very old challenge